Hello, everybody that's joining us. Welcome. We'll just take a few minutes to let all the participants join in. Just everyone, as you're joining us, we'd really love you to pop in the chat what country we're on today. And if you don't know, that's okay. You can pop a question in the chat to find out how you can discover what country you're on. Our lovely manager at RecVic is manning the chat or womaning the chat. So please feel free to just pop any questions in there as we go along, and myself or Arbup will answer them to the best of our abilities. And then a tiny bit of housekeeping as well. We will be using Mentimeter quite a lot throughout the presentation. For those of you who aren't familiar, you will need your mobile phone. And then when the Mentimeter slide pops up on the screen, you can use your camera to take a picture of the QR code, or you can type in the Mentimeter web address, which is also will be listed on the slide, and then answer some interactive questions. Again, if you're having any trouble with that, or sometimes we have little quirks with technology, please feel free to put your answers in the chat as well, because we can record them that way. So I think we'll make a start. For those who are just joining now, just put your country that you're on in the chat once more. So I'll just give a quick introduction of myself. I'm Sarah Joyce. I'm the Education Officer at Reconciliation Victoria, and joining us today is Arbup Peters. He's a Koorie Education Coordinator with the Koorie Engagement Unit at the Department of Education. He will introduce himself properly in a minute. Now, before we start anything, we always give an acknowledgement of country. So Reconciliation Victoria acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Victoria and recognises First Peoples' continuing connection to lands, waters and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present who carry the memories, traditions, cultures and aspirations of First People and who forge the path ahead for emerging leaders. So today's presentation by Arbup, obviously, this is on the slide, is cultural inclusion and understanding the cultural lens. It was billed as anti-racism in the promotion, which obviously this is, but this is the specific topic we'll be talking about today. So over to you, Arbup.
Fantastic. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Yes, my name is Arbup Peters. I'm a proud Yarra Yarra Wurundjeri Tanarong Yorta Yorta man. And I'd like to firstly start with a traditional welcome to country. So bear with me, and here we go. Biladu Janra, Marinik Arbup Peters, Balatu Dalalali Wurundjeri Tanarong Yorta Yorta. Wiminjaka Yumunkundabik Wurundjeri Milambelik, Mirambina Amaru Bababik. That is the language of my people. That are the Yarra Yarra Wurundjeri people and neighbouring Kulin nations. And firstly, I said, hi, my name's Arbup. I firstly like to welcome you to this beautiful land that we know as Mother Earth. Pay my respects to elders past, present and evolving. And in the name of true reconciliation, I'd like to welcome all people from all nations and nationalities that are here today. And I think that's important, especially in our times that we currently find ourselves in. I think it's important that we do acknowledge all peoples from all nations and nationalities across the board. And one of the things I'm going to let you know that I'd like you to do after this event is so you get a better understanding where I'm coming from and where Aboriginal people and First Nations people are. We often get asked a lot of questions in regards to welcome to countries and acknowledgements to countries and all those different things too, which is fantastic. But we still come up against a couple of roadblocks here and there because they don't know, are we doing it right? Aren't we doing it right? Whatever it is. The best way to answer a question about culture is to understand your own culture first. If you don't have your own culture understood or where you're from and who you are, how are you expected to actually then understand, reflect, and respect on a culture that's never been taught? So my challenge to you, and it's an easy challenge to take on board, as we know and I'm going to touch on this once, as we know, in October, we have a big question to answer. I'm not here to tell you which way to vote or which way to go, but hopefully this exercise will make it clear for you. What I want you to do after today, tomorrow, next day, whatever it is, I want you to research your own name. Where did your name come from? Yeah, your parents gave you your name, but do you know the origin of your name? And if you can dig deep into that, find out the origin, find out its meaning, find out where it came from, all those different things, it's actually going to get you in touch with your heritage, your roots, your journey, your identity. And then when you start having those little aha moments in that space, you then get to understand, well, wow, I didn't even know that about myself. Now I start to understand what another nation or another nationality is going through. So when the question comes, is it yes, is it no? You now have an understanding. If I don't understand my own identity and own name and how difficult that would be, how difficult would it be for an Aboriginal person? That's just a little bit of food for thought. You do that. And I want you to search your first name, your middle name, your surname, your parents' maiden names, know where your culture's come from, because then as soon as you answer, if you're Irish and you do a deep dive into your Irish name and you do a deep dive into where you come from, you'll see a lot of similarities that happened overseas that is happening here. Then you may then have a better understanding of why the voice to Parliament is important. So we'll leave it to there. Can I please have the next slide, Sarah?
Yes. So everybody, we're just going to do a little bit of a quick Mentimeter here. So as I said at the beginning, if you just grab your phones and take a picture of the QR code, we just like to gauge people's level of knowledge of the topics at the start of each webinar. So I'm not sure if people can see on the screen, but you can join at menti.com and type in the code, or you can take a picture of the QR code, which is on the screen. So we just want to gauge what your level of knowledge is about these concepts that we're going to talk about today. Lovely, some things coming through. And really, please just be completely honest. Like there's no aspersions cast on any of these answers. We just really want people's true level of engagement and knowledge about this. And then hopefully we can build on what you know, and if your knowledge is low, then hopefully you can walk away having a lot more. Lovely. Just give it a couple more seconds of people's answers. All righty. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. I did notice in that Mentimeter there that there's someone that's got a lot of knowledge out there, so I hope I don't disappoint that particular person. But no, thank you for coming on. Before we get any started as well, one of the things I really like to emphasize with my presentations, I'm a very visual person. So a lot of my presentations, especially what's on screen, I will talk to. I'm not a verbatim type person where what's on screen, I'm going to read it off and then you are. I think that's boring. Anybody can do that. What I do, I tend to have food for thought on the screen. I'll talk to that particular presentation or that slide and just know that at the end of the presentation, my entire presentation is available to be distributed to the participants today as well. And then you also then have the privilege of getting the back messaging what I have in my notes. So what I speak to and then what's on the screen enables you to revisit that at any particular stage. And hopefully that helps you, I suppose, digest a little bit more. You can revisit it whenever time you want, and you'll find that that's quite good. So this particular one now, you'll see there's two images, the triangle and the circle. A lot of you may understand that particular triangle. It's a pyramid. It's that tiered approach. I struggle with identifying and using that tiered approach. When we start targeting students and we place them in the pointy end of a pyramid or the pointy end of the top, we're highlighting them, and the anxieties start to come in, not only to the student, but to the parents or the carer. So yeah, we might have to have a lot of focus on the individual at the top or the targeted area just underneath, and then everybody below. But I tend to want to use a circle approach. I want to use the wraparound. I want to use the virtual hug when it comes to that, the tightness of that. So when we're talking about a tiered approach, I tend to have an individual approach. They're in the center, they're in the middle. They need support, and they need support on a scale that goes not only for them, but for their immediate family outside, for their friends and family and school community, everything. So you see that if you can have an understanding of the two different, of the same system, but in a different approach, it helps you then understand what it means to give that wraparound approach too. So that's one thing that I really want to emphasize. Really has nothing to do with that, but other than a better understanding. So thank you. Next one. Yeah, we've got the jigsaw puzzle up. Fantastic. What you see here is very important. Every cultural piece is the same, but it's yet different. Even though I've evenly spaced it all out, every piece is important, yet no order of these pieces overrides the other. Everyone attends these type of PDs on a periodical basis, yet we all walk away from PD with a different perspective and understanding, yet everybody is right. So even though all these pieces are the same, they really are, they're still all different. And whatever piece you take away from that is your own individual piece. Thank you. Which brings me to my cultural lens. And the reason why I put this presentation together a while ago was I started getting a lot of aha moments from a lot of people, from a lot of non-Aboriginal people. And I had people coming up asking me questions or reluctant to ask me questions, which brings me to my next point. Whatever the question you have in your head is how I want to hear it. Your questions are important. If you've got a question in your head and you go, oh, I don't know how to ask that, or oh, I fear that if I ask that, I'm going to offend, or I'm going to get it wrong, or I'm going to be ridiculed. No, you're not. The best way to actually answer that particular topic right now, if I can hear the question or read the question, how you type it, how you say it, how it's in your head, I can not only understand where you're coming from, I can answer it to my best ability. And if I don't know the answer, I won't make it up and I'll get you the answer. But what it is I can also then educate you. Thank you for your question. The way you've asked it's fantastic. You had the guts and courage to ask that question that way. Here's the answer. Next time, approach it from this angle. Because I think it's important that if you understand that no question, or the only question, and you would have heard this statement before, the only question you don't ask is the wrong question. Because if you walk away today, or you walk away not taking my email address down and asking me a question in a day or two, how are you going to learn? So with this cultural lens, I would love everyone right now, if I could, to have a kaleidoscope. And with that kaleidoscope, what do we do when we first get it? If I had one in my hand right now, I'd bring it to my eye. And the first thing I do is I turn it. And when I'm turning it, I'm coming up with a whole lot of different images, patterns. Oh, look at that one. Oh, look at that one. And that's a cultural lens. And what I mean by that cultural lens, and if you like to click through all those, Sarah, that would be great. What I mean by that cultural lens is when you click on a cultural lens, you get an opportunity to start seeing a different amount of knowledge in there. And when I pass this kaleidoscope to Sarah, what's the first thing Sarah does? Sarah picks it up, she brings it to her eye, and she turns it. So what I've just given her as the final image that I had, and then Sarah changes it, she has a different view. She has a different perspective and a different understanding. Now that's fantastic, because a cultural lens is this. There is so many answers. So even when you've been in a classroom, where you've been in another meeting, and then you hear someone else talk about a topic, and you go, oh my God, I never thought of it that way. Or, oh, have I been wrong all this time? No, you haven't. There is no wrong or right answer to a cultural lens. There are only different answers and different perspectives. So if I give you an answer in one way and you have another answer in that way, I'm neither right or wrong. You're neither right or wrong. We're just different. And I can guarantee you, in a room of 50 people, there's going to be 50 different views on topics. So when you see this particular topic where it comes around all those different things, cultural empathy, cultural trade, cultural youth, cultural freedom, that's a cultural lens. Every single one of them has a different connotation, it has a different meaning, has a different outlook. And every single one of us on screen today would have a different understanding, a different interpretation, a different thought pattern when it comes to all these things. So my views do not override your views. Your views do not override Sarah's views. It's just different. And different is okay. That's the part you have to really take on board. If you believe and start understanding that it's okay to be slightly different, slightly obscure than the next person, you then get to a point where your cultural inclusion, your cultural responsiveness, and your cultural lens is then understood. Next slide, please. What you see here is merely the same thing as the kaleidoscope. So every single one of these topics here is, I've got a slide to. You won't get all of these ones unless Sarah twists my arm up my back and I'll gladly handle it. But these 60 odd pieces that I have here, I've got another 60 cultural topics that need to have a little bit of a deep dive in. And I've picked out 4 today: cultural communication, cultural empathy, cultural engagement, and cultural support. And I think they're important. For where you are, one of those things is in your wheelhouse right now. Your cultural communication. How do you cultural communicate? How do you support somebody culturally? The empathy that you put into it and that engagement is very, very important. Which leads me to this, the cultural bucket. Believe it or not, every single one of you educators out there has a cultural bucket. And it's not just an Aboriginal First Nations cultural bucket. It's every single child that you deal with from every single cultural background. And how full is your bucket? I can tell you, if mine's full and overflowing, I know yours will be too. And we've all heard the terms, the cultural bucket, the cultural knapsack, the cultural load. It's about understanding that. And then when you're going from, say, one SSG or an individual education plan to the next, they start building. You forgot one cultural problem in the classroom, and then that cultural problem manifests itself in the play yard and even at home. You're carrying that cultural burden. And when you carry that cultural burden, it just sits there. It doesn't go away. So whatever you've got in that cultural bucket needs to be addressed. And it needs to be addressed fast. I have a team of 3 Kezos and myself, the KEC, Koorie Education Coordinator. And a Kezo is a Koorie Education Support Officer. Each of my Kezos has over 100 students to look after. And they hear all of their cultural stories from within school, playgrounds, outside, home, sport, everything. And they carry that cultural burden. And they carry that cultural burden from one SSG to the next, to the next, to the next. So one of my jobs is making sure that their cultural bucket doesn't overflow too much and trying to put things into a little bit of perspective and understanding. And to get that understanding leads me to my iceberg. We've all seen this iceberg and we'll all understand it. And this particular one, I will read verbatim. The term cultural iceberg of knowledge is typically used to describe the idea that only a small portion of the person's knowledge or expertise is visible. That little iceberg at the top, it sticks out. And that's the thing that we understand. That's the thing that we know that's bubbling on the surface. But we all know that that particular iceberg, and you can click through, that particular iceberg has so much to it. There's so much things that we constantly know when it comes to Aboriginal culture or First Nations culture. We know all of those things at the top. We know art and we know dance and elders and language. We know about the countries that we're on. We know about the flags. We have a brief knowledge about their beliefs. We know how to do acknowledgement, with festivals, the food, the craft. They're the things that we know that sit on the surface. But it's the things that are more just under the surface. Do you really know about the storytelling, the community, the extended family? Do you really know about kingship and massacres? Now, I won't go into massacres, but they do happen, or they did happen. The spiritual connection, every single one of those yellow topics, we loosely know a lot about it. But then when you do a deeper dive, and we start getting into that deep college, do you know what eye contact means? Do you know what the gestures, the cultural acknowledge, the Fauna and Fauna Act? And that still baffles me that a lot of people don't really understand the Fauna and Fauna Act. The religions, the dreaming, the stolen generation, the difference between stolen generation and stolen heritage. And there is a difference. Stolen generation is what we understand, where children were taken from families. But the extension of that was stolen heritage. And through that stolen heritage, what I mean by that is my father, Eric Oswald Peters, was a part of that stolen heritage. When he grew up, his heritage was stolen and taken from him. My grandmother was not allowed to teach him anything about culture. Wasn't allowed to teach him language. Wasn't allowed to teach him anything to do with hunter-gatherer. Wasn't allowed to get uncles and grandfathers to teach him tool making. That heritage was stolen from him. So there is a similarity, but there is a difference. And then you go a little bit deeper. You go through the facial expressions, personal space, body language, leadership, courtesy, and it goes on. And it is a deep iceberg of knowledge. So if you start to understand that there's a lot more to the iceberg than just what we know, it starts to give you an understanding of where we can help in our space. Which leads me to the topics of today. Cultural tokenism. And what I mean by that is it's rife. It's out there. Oh, let's do this today because it's Aboriginal Week. Or let's celebrate Reconciliation Week. And, what are we going to do? Okay, we're going to have a morning tea. We're going to have a barbecue. But really, let's take that a step back. They're great ideas, don't get me wrong. But a lot of that tokenism is last-minute ideas. Oh, has anyone done anything next week for Reconciliation Week? Or maybe we should do something. Oh, no. Or maybe we should get in contact with an elder and see if they can come out. A week before Reconciliation Week, you want to try and get an elder? Not going to happen. But what can you do? Don't focus on the week. Focus on the pre and the post of that week. You're going to get more opportunity to possibly then engage with a community member. You're going to get more opportunity to maybe get an elder to come out, or a Kezo or a Kek, and start planning. Start planning today what you want to do for Reconciliation Week next year. Take that tokenistic element out of the equation. To put that into perspective, when do you start to plan Christmas? Because I can tell you, I start planning Christmas on Boxing Day after the previous one. When the sales are on, I'm going to go buy more wrapping paper, more cards, more decorations, more lights for my front of my house because they're cheap, whatever. That's when I start planning. Can you imagine celebrating and planning Christmas 1 week before Christmas. Because at the moment, that's what we do for NAIDOC week. That's what we do for Reconciliation week. We wait to the last minute, or we wait for someone else to step and put up their hand and go, oh yeah, we'll jump on board, we'll help. That's tokenism. Be active. Introduce activism. Be positive in that space, because we want to get rid of the lack of genuine engagement. We actually want to promote that. And your best promoters to actually engage in that space, believe it or not, are your students. You give them a task 1 or 2 months out. We've got Reconciliation Week coming up in a month, a bit, month, 2 months, whatever. What do we want to do? They'll give you the ideas. Or I know, maybe we should have an art competition. And then the teacher sits there and goes, oh, we can't do that. We're not allowed to do art. Yes, you are. Take that tokenism out of your head. Make sure that you do something that's more forthcoming. You'll understand what it means by that. Take away that symbolic acknowledgement. Have a genuine acknowledgement. I know I work in the Inner East at the moment, and my Kezos and myself, we go out to a lot of schools. And if there's any Inner East school representation out there now, you'll probably know where I'm coming from. But we actually love going out to schools. We love working on the acknowledgement to country, not with the school and the staff, but with the students. They give the best acknowledgements. The wording they come up with, the way they want to change the wording, the way they want to introduce some language. They are the ones that are taking tokenism out of the equation. So our students are now our teachers, and now our teachers are now our students. And you can take a leaf out of that. It is fantastic that that happens. So there's a lot of points there. Stereotyping, lack of representation, empty apologies, all those different things. You can go through that, and you can go through every single one of them. It gives you an opportunity to read a lot of these failed to address systematic inequality, inequities of all that as well. And if you start having an understanding of a lot of these points, it will come natural. It will come natural where if you've got an Aboriginal student in your classroom, they're not the ones to ask the Aboriginal question. Just because you've got an Aboriginal student in your class, please refrain from asking them, what do you think of this topic? What do you think should happen? Because I can tell you right now, if you put them on the spot, they will delve deep into themselves, and they will not want to be in that class tomorrow. They will go home and they will talk to their mum, their carer, their dad. Well, I got asked this question today. And the parents, then they get uproared and go, oh, here we go again. This is what I went through when I went to school. You know, have an open discussion with everybody else around, because everybody needs to be involved addressing this. And if we can start doing that, the Aboriginal child will start to appreciate that. Not every Aboriginal child knows and fully understands their cultural history, their cultural identity. They're on a journey. And that's why I did at the start of this particular thing, placing you in that same journey. Do you understand everything about who you are and about where your culture's from? If the answer is yes, that's fantastic. But if the answer is no, or you're not quite sure, then we've all got some work to do. Because would you like me to come to you and say, you're Irish? Oh, do you know that little place over in Ireland? No. Oh, I thought you would. You're Irish, aren't you? So what gives people the right to understand, oh, just because they're Aboriginal doesn't mean they know anything, because you're going to take yourself back. Aboriginal people, for a period of time, for a long period of time, were denied their identity. And we're playing catch up. I, as a proud Aboriginal, are playing catch up. Do I know everything? No, I do not. I do not know everything, and I love being challenged. Because when I get challenged, it makes me do a deeper dive into that particular question, and finding out. And that's why I came up with this particular cultural lens. So what is a cultural lens? What is the meaning of the following? What is the meaning of cultural empathy, cultural communication, cultural engagement, and cultural support? When I do this presentation normally, what I tend to do, and when you get this presentation yourself, you can take and you can unpack this a little bit further, where you've got a little leadership group at school, and you can ask that particular leadership group, what's your interpretation of cultural empathy? And what's your interpretation of cultural communication? And what's your interpretation of engagement or support? Right? And stop and listen to what it is. So next, a cultural lens, cultural empathy. This is just my first point of cultural empathy. Cultural empathy is the capacity within a person to identify with the feelings, thoughts, and behavior of individuals from different cultural backgrounds. And for your schools, this means promote that cultural empathy to your fellow staff, highlight the right norms. There is power in drawing attention to behavior that exemplifies empathy. That's coming from me as an Aboriginal person. Prior to you reading that, you probably had different thoughts of what cultural empathy meant. And then reading my thoughts, you're going, maybe I was wrong all this time. No, you weren't. You were not wrong. You were just different. And different is okay. Because what we've done over the past is someone's come over the top and gone, oh, you've got to do it this way. You've got to do it that way. You're doing it. Your cultural lens, your cultural empathy is different. If you come from a school of 60 teachers, potentially you're going to have 30 to 40 different views of what that means. That's what I want to hear. That's what I want to engage with. Because not only do you get it, but you've got the capacity to get it from the view from another person. And then if you do get an understanding, you do bump into that Aboriginal parent at parent-teacher night, at an SSG meeting, and they give you a different view, don't stop and go, oh, I've got it wrong all this time. No. Embrace what they're telling you. Put that into your kit of information. Put that into your toolkit of understanding, because now you've got a broader understanding of that perspective. And that's where it's important. Next one. What are we up to now? Cultural communication. And in that cultural communication, once again, I'm not going to read it, but the first one, I'll read the for schools, because in my notes, not only have I got that my point of view in black, I've added 2 or 3 others in there as well. So when you get my notes, you'll get to understand 2 or 3 points of what cultural communication is, and then you get what it means maybe for you and your school. And for schools, this means investing in the use of cultural words, phrases, yes, and trying to invite Aboriginal community members or elders to your school, not only for cultural activities or storytelling, but to also conduct acknowledgements or welcome to countries. Potentially, sometimes they can do smoking ceremonies if they're being trained in that place, attend school events, invite them to school council meetings, and even potentially inviting an Aboriginal parent or carer to be on the school council. That's important. You start doing that, you're starting to engage, you're starting to do a lot of those different things. You're starting to then to have cultural inclusion embedded in your schools. That's important. Racism is before we go to the next one, or you've got it up there, but racism is another one as well. There's a lot of racism out there, and it really is evident a lot of times. It can be evident in schools, in communities, in social events, social media, on the football field. Racism is rife, It's not only rife just in Aboriginal culture, it's rife across the board. When was the last time you seen Stephen May from the Melbourne Football Club racially vilified? Now you're thinking, Stephen May, isn't he white? He's pale skinned. He's Aboriginal. A lot of people don't know that, or sips over the head, and they go, oh, and that's why he doesn't get vilified. His appearance is different. Can you imagine Eddie Betts playing alongside Stephen May? Two brothers in arms, one taller than the other, one darker than the other, but they're both Aboriginal. They're both proud. They're both Aboriginal. Their families are Aboriginal, and both get hurt by one of them being racially vilified. Racism does not discriminate. Racism is there and it's rife. We, as Aboriginal people, feel it, breathe it, witness it every day. Do you believe it or not? Every year I have this conversation with a lot of schools, and every year I still get the same question. Oh, we've just had a new family come to the school, and they say they're Aboriginal, but they don't look it. That's racism. Did you know that the Aboriginal culture is the only dark culture in the world, that when the two marriages mix, that the whiteness is the dominant gene, not the darkness. That's a fact. And that's why the witnessing politicians back in the day seen this happen to Aboriginal families, and that's how the stolen generation became. That they thought, oh, and if you've seen Rabbit Proof Fence, have a strong look at that again. Have a strong look at the messaging that's behind it, because the politicians of the day realized this phenomena, and they thought, oh, well, if we can't kill it out of them, we can't kill them off, how about we breed it out of them? And that was the statement that was made. But DNA has a wonderful way of upsetting that apple cart, because no matter how many generations go by, that Aboriginal DNA marker will always be there. So it can never be bred out of us. Hence why at times we used to feel, or the governments used to feel that, oh, you're a half caste, you're a quarter caste, you're an eighth. All these different things came through. And they used to think octone, that once you got to an eighth, that once the next generation was bred, oh, it's no longer there. It's gone. That's not the case. So that's where it really makes it difficult in coming in play with that. So just remember that. So when we get into cultural engagement, keep clicking, please, Sarah. That'd be great. One of the things is cultural engagement means speaking into relationships. And for schools, this means to develop a culture of engagement by focusing and creating on cultural connection with the Koorie Education Workforce. So please reach out to us as our KEZOs, as our KECs. We'll come out to your schools. And if you're out of the area, every single area, whether it's regional, whether it's northwest, southeast, southwest, we all have KEZOs, we all have KECs, we all have KEMs, and we all have local communities. If you want us to engage, just reach out, because we'll come out and we'll do a cultural inclusion audit in that space that hopefully gets you over the board. Next one, cultural support. Once again, a couple of points there. You'll have an understanding of that cultural support. It gives you an understanding in that space. But for schools, this means working closely with and establishing a one-on-one relationship with the Koorie Education workforce. It is absolutely important that you start engaging and including local Aboriginal people that work for organisations. It may not be all educational. You could have Department of Justice Aboriginal workers. We know we've got the Aboriginal workers in DFFH, in child protection, the agencies that we work with, VACA, VARS, VALS, they're all there. And we're all there, ready, willing, and able to lend that hand when it comes to that space. That's 4 things that I talked about today. And we'll probably try and get a couple more in a minute, but we've only touched on 4. So we're going to get to the next one, and I'm going to just quickly hand over to Sarah. What's this question, Sarah?
Yes, Arbup, we're just going to get everyone to be a little bit interactive again, because we've heard a lot of fabulous and really in-depth information from you. And we'd love you to sort of reflect on that right now by grabbing your phone and taking a pic of the QR code to get to Menti. We want to know, how can the things that Arbup's just talked about, how can cultural communication, cultural empathy and cultural support be improved in your school? And look, we don't need an essay about that. We just want, 1 or 2 words, that's things that immediately come to mind. Arbup gave some really great suggestions in his presentation, but I'm sure people can think of some things off the top of their head. One that comes to mind for me is cultivating true and strong relationships with the Aboriginal community connected to the school.
Cool.
Great. Responsive, not reactive. Yeah, that's a great one. Yep, including the community, embedded, knowledge sharing. All of these things are really great. And, even if you can't think of things right now, because some of these concepts might be newer to you, I encourage you, like as Arbup said, take this back to your school, back to your working group, or to any kind of communication that you have with fellow staff, and start asking these questions of each other. And, you can ask yourself this fairly regularly, because everything shifts, everything's dynamic. And as your knowledge increases, so might your ideas. Planning thoughtfully, kept their presence at school. These are great. Yes, I love the student-led acknowledgements. I'm going to echo what Arbup said. The ones I've heard of schools that I've gone to, they're just absolutely beautiful. And the kids take so much care, and they're super passionate about what they say, because they've put the effort into, trying to make it really meaningful for themselves and for Aboriginal community members. So
absolutely. And while they're still typing there, Sarah, just on that too, the best students that I've heard doing acknowledgements to countries, I don't know how many members out there on screen at the moment, but the early years centres, the kindergartens, unbelievable. They do it the best.
Yeah.
I actually get choked up when I go out there and I see them do their little dances, their little gestures, singing that particular thing, whatever the wording they're using. And when I see that, it really, the first time I ever seen it, it touched me. And then I have a story to share with you in that space. Is not only that happening, but then the next year, when those kindergarten, grade 4, year 4 preppies turned into school, and schools weren't doing an acknowledgement of the country, these kindergarten kids go, "Excuse me, miss, are we going to do the acknowledgement of the country, or welcome to country today?" And it put the embarrassment back on the teachers. And so all those foundation and prep teachers go, "Oh my God, we've got to embrace this." And you have. And what I find there in that space is the continuation of that great work from kindergartens into schools and into every year. And then when we do get to the schools and help reword the acknowledgement and put in house names, student names, all these different things that come into it, it makes it so important. And really, that's the emphasis that we want to really create. So
I'll echo that, Arbup. One of the best ones I saw was done by a group of preppies because they just put their little hearts and soul into it, and it was just truly beautiful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which brings us to the next one. So we're actually going to talk about a couple of little things here now. And obviously that's cultural awareness, cultural understanding, cultural competence, and cultural responsiveness. All four important points with all varying differences in those areas as well. And when we get to the next one, so you get to that, and we are going to talk about cultural awareness. And cultural awareness is just this. For schools, this means having a broad overview of our histories, our culture, and our languages for Aboriginal First Nation people, including the students, and especially including parents, carers, local communities. It's being aware of knowledge. And when doing that, let's just park Aboriginal and First Nations people to a side. Every school we have now, I dare to think, how many different cultures do we actually have in a school? You know, it fits in well. And we are just focusing right now in this 1 hour about Aboriginal First Nations people. But you go back to the school, because I've heard questions. I have what about the Chinese students that we have, and what about the Asian? I'm not saying forget them. All I'm saying, it's our turn to actually be acknowledged at the same time. And you can use any of these notes and any of these points and embed a better, safer cultural environment in your school for all cultures. All I'm presenting today is to give you an understanding that awareness cuts deeper than just one culture. Which leads me to the next one, cultural understanding. We all have varying different views when it comes to understanding culture, and that is fine. My understanding on some cultures is limited. My understanding in the Aboriginal space is quite high. I'm happy to share all the time. But at for schools, this means building that engagement at the local level and developing relationships in the school community. If you're going to invite an Aboriginal person to be part of the school community, don't give up on inviting them to events. If they haven't been invited multiple times, they may never turn up. So persist in inviting them. Invite them directly.
Sorry, Arbup. I'm just going to interject with a lovely comment from the chat from Reservoir East saying they have a wonderful Koorie education program in place and they have a dedicated Koorie room and Koorie staff. So that's just, so yes, I know it's lovely and exciting to hear, but I just thought I'd share that for the other educators that are listening as a really lovely example of how you can enact in a practical way all these things that Arbup's been talking about.
Absolutely, and that's really important to actually come across that way. And one of the things that a lot of you educators might know already that's happening in schools, and some of you may already know of who the person is. Every school in Victoria has been tasked with identifying one designated teacher, if not two or three, or one to three teachers to be what we call a Marung lead. Our Marung leads are our foot soldiers. They're not necessarily Aboriginal in the school, but our Kezos and our Keks, we will be in contact with that particular Marung lead, and we invite them to meetings, to have meetings with us, and we try and give them the necessary tools and understanding of what they can do in that space. It could be about embedding curriculum. It could be about making your school more culturally inclusive. Right now, I'd be disappointed to know that if every school has not got a minimum of two flags or flagpoles, the Aboriginal flag and the Australian flag, but most schools are really embedding the three flags, the Aboriginal flag, the Australian flag, and the Torres Strait Islander flag. They're making that more culturally inclusive. In the Inner East, what we're doing at the moment also is having our staff go out and we age your trees. What we go out in that space, if you've got some old gum trees there, old big old trees, we come out, we've got a tool, we've got an understanding how that tree can be aged, and then we're actually dating it back to some significant times. We've got some schools that have got trees that were dated back to 1900, and so
It's amazing.
we've got it all plaqued up as a Federation tree. We've got trees that have been planted in World War II and so we've got Anzac trees. We've got trees that have been dated to 1967, and we call that the reconciliation tree. And then we've got trees that are over 150 years old that mirror the image of a school when it first got built and the tree got planted. That's their foundation tree, and we get them all plaqued up. You can do a number of different things of cultural inclusion, and by the method of what we do, we make sure we know exactly the width of the tree, and we introduce math into that project, and then they work out the math and how old that tree is. And by getting them plaqued up and then making sure that on those reconciliation events, we can go out and you can stand around and have an assembly around something. So it's a number of different ways. The next one, next slide, please. I'm sorry, I do digress a little bit from my slides, but I do get a little bit passionate at times. So thank you for allowing me to digress.
No, we're letting you do that, Arbup, because it's so amazing. But we're tracking towards the end of the webinar. So if I start clicking through a little faster.
No worries at all. Okay, so here we are. This particular one slide, cultural competency. Now, as an Aboriginal, I struggle with cultural competency. And I find it's going to be one of the hardest ones to actually get right for anybody. Because I don't think I've ever met somebody that is fully competent in everything they do. And if you think you are, let's have a second guess at that. When was the last time a student came up to you, asked you a question, and you were stumped? Happens all the time. And I hope you don't turn around and make up an answer. You go to the staff room and you turn around and go, oh, I just got to ask this. Where do I get? Come to the queue. We mightn't have the answers. We'll try and research the answers. But to have cultural competency, it means recognizing the diverse cultural needs of students and building on the relationships. That's the best way of tackling that particular one. It's a hard one to tackle, but just know that every day there is room for improvement. Every day there is room for learning.
And we definitely feel that strongly at Reconciliation Victoria. And for those of you who haven't attended one of our webinars before, we send out a resource sheet post-webinar, which includes a lot of links and resources related to the topic that we're talking about. But we have a whole section as well, which is self-education. And we believe really strongly that to work safely and competently in this space, you really have to consistently and constantly self-educate. So we do some of the work for you, and we create lists of podcasts and media sites and things like that where you can absorb and learn and reflect on more information. So I just thought I'd interject with that as well.
Thanks, Sarah. That's very important. And then the last slide before we go into the Medi-meters again is about cultural responsiveness. It's how you respond. It's how your passion comes through. And what I find with a lot of these presentations that I do and what I've been to and all that too, there will be passion right now. Hopefully when you leave today, leave tonight, revisit the slides in a couple of days' time and all that too. Get the extension of a lot of these slides. Have those open conversations. But it's how you respond to those cultural questions which is best. And for schools, it is about the responsive to the diverse needs, backgrounds, experiences, and knowledge of Aboriginal Koorie students, and being able to use these as a basis to facilitate learning opportunities. So I encourage you in this space to find out who your Marung lead is within your school, reach out to them, and then get your KESOs and get your KECs involved in your schools, because in that space right now, trying to embed Aboriginal cultural perspectives in the curriculum is very, very high on our agenda, and we want to work with you. And we want to work with your schools, individual teachers, and with your local communities, get them involved. And when you start seeing families, or when seeing families start seeing you getting involved in this space, I can tell you one thing. 2017, when I first started back at the Department of Education in my area, I only had 139 Aboriginal students enrolled in my schools, or who identified. And because of the inclusion, because of its responsiveness, because of the involvement, this year, 6 years on, I have 389 Aboriginal students that identify. That's not new students to the school. That's families that recognise the good work that schools are currently doing, and then go, okay, we feel that this school is culturally safe. We're going to identify. And because of that, our responsiveness comes through. Hand you back over to you, Sarah.
Oh, that's really, really beautiful. But we'd just like to ask a couple of reflective questions at the end to take away with you, and you can take these back to your schools and work groups at schools as well. We just would like to know what's something you'll stop doing, reflecting on the little tips and ideas. Yeah, last minute, exactly. That's a really great one. What other things might you stop doing? Yeah, love it. Sometimes these ones are tricky, and I know we're reaching the end of what has been probably a really long day for you. So if you're finding this one tricky to answer now, it's okay, but we really would encourage you to think about this question just yourself, or chat about it at your next staff meeting, or your next reflective planning day. Yeah, these are all really great things. Yep. Yep. Lovely. Yes, removing tokenism. And I think the more we educate ourselves, the easier that is to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Love it. We're going to flip it to another question, which is similar, but it just requires a slight bit of mind shift. What's something really positive that you can think of, like not just the opposite of what you're doing here, but like a classroom activity or a specific event or something? We'd really love people to take something away that you're going to commit to doing in your classroom and in your school, which would be, I find that, at the end of these webinars, if we don't sort of commit to doing one thing, and it can be something super small, it's like tomorrow I will go into my classroom and I will tell my students something I learned today, or I will share with other teachers the presentation that Sarah will send out to you, that I will commit to reading and educating myself more about Aboriginal cultures, histories. Lovely. Embedding Koorie ideas, informed planning. I love it. That makes me feel really happy. Sharing knowledge. These are beautiful. Keep on learning. Koorie education programs, reaching out to the CASOs. And look, a lot of CASOs are pretty overworked. We know that they're stretched across a lot of schools, but they're all super dedicated. And so if you don't get the immediate fulfillment of your request, keep persisting with them, because they might be dealing with a bigger issue at another school. So they are there to work with you. Yeah, lovely. Using Koorie ingredients, great. Enriching culture. I love these. And student-led acknowledgements, beautiful. Just to wrap up at the end of our presentation, we always love to ask people just quickly if you have learned things in this webinar. So we just want to know, has your knowledge of the concepts that Arbup's talked about today, have they increased based upon what you knew coming into the webinar? And at the end, this is lovely. I'm very happy to see, as I'm sure you are. It's a resounding yes. Stayed the same. That's okay, because some people will come into this with a different level of knowledge. But I think one thing I reflected on when I was reading through Arbup's presentation, there's a lot of things that I could reflect deeper on. Like I might have a higher level of knowledge than some people that I know, but I think one of the beautiful things about this space is that you can always keep learning and you can always keep digging deeper to increase your knowledge. And I think that's something you've really shared very, very clearly with us, Arbup. This is lovely. This is beautiful. Thank you, everybody. I'm really aware that we're like bang on 5 o'clock. So just sharing this slide, but please know that I will send this slide pack out to you with our resource sheet. So you have all of Arbup's details, and he is, you can say yourself, Arbup, but you're very, very happy to be contacted, aren't you?
Very much so, yes.
Yes. So thank you so much for your time, Arbup. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise, and we'll probably look at getting Arbup to do a sort of a more advanced workshop for us in this space at a later date. Please keep the 5th of October in your diaries. We'll be running our next education webinar on that date. And if you're subscribed to our newsletter, you will receive a notification. Otherwise, look out on Eventbrite or in your school networks for details. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and have a lovely evening.
Awesome.
Thank you.